Welcome to Wild HOA Situations. This is what selective enforcement looks like. I am standing on my porch in Cedar Pointe Commons in Bangor, Maine, holding a bright warning tag that was not on my windshield when I parked last night, and Ruth Parker is already yelling at me from the curb. She is waving a laminated policy sheet like it is a search warrant. "You have 72 hours to remove that vehicle or we tow," she says, her voice cutting through the cold morning air. I work nights as a warehouse supervisor, so I sleep during the day, and I just woke up to this nightmare. The violation notice claims my truck has been parked in the same spot for more than 14 consecutive days, which is a lie. I moved it 3 times this week alone, and I have the gas receipts to prove it. Ruth Parker is the finance committee lead for the Cedar Pointe Commons Association, and she has a reputation for adding mysterious line items to the budget that nobody can explain. She is a middle-aged white woman with black hair and a short bob, wearing a red windbreaker and a red sun hat even though it is barely 50 degrees out. She is holding a coffee tumbler in one hand like it is a prop in a courtroom drama, and she keeps tapping the laminated sheet against her palm. "I decide what counts as compliant, not you," she says, and I recognize that line because she has used it before. My elderly parent is staying with me right now, recovering from a fall, and the stress of this HOA nonsense is making everything harder. I need this resolved fast. I pull out my phone and show her the doorbell camera footage from 2 days ago, the timestamp clear in the corner, showing me backing out of the driveway at 6 in the morning. She does not even look at it. "That does not prove anything," she says. "You could have just moved it to the street and back." The policy sheet she is holding has no readable text on it, but she keeps jabbing her finger at a section near the bottom like it is scripture. I ask her to show me the actual violation log, the one that is supposed to document when the complaint was filed and who filed it. She says the log is not public record and I will have to submit a formal request through the management portal. I tell her I am submitting that request right now, and I pull up the portal on my phone while she is still standing there. She shifts her weight and her tone changes. "You know, we can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works," she says, and I feel my jaw tighten. That line is going to come back to haunt her, I can already tell. I let her keep talking because she does not realize I am recording this conversation on my doorbell camera. A gate technician with a tool bag is walking up the sidewalk behind her, probably here to fix the entry keypad again, and he slows down when he hears her yelling. He gives me a look that says he has seen this before. I ask Ruth to tell me exactly what part of the policy I violated, and she pivots. She says the issue is not just the parking. It is also that my trash cans were visible from the street last Tuesday. I point out that trash day is Wednesday, so the cans were out the night before like everyone else. She says mine were out earlier than allowed. I ask what time the rule says we can put them out. She says she will check and get back to me. The goalposts just moved and I can see the gate technician shaking his head as he walks past. Ruth turns to leave, but then she stops and looks back at me. She says the hearing is scheduled for next Thursday at 10 in the morning. I work nights, so 10 in the morning is the middle of my sleep cycle. I tell her that, and she shrugs. "That is the only time the board is available," she says. "If you do not show up, we vote by default." I realize this is the HOA method they use here, scheduling hearings at impossible times so people no-show, and they can default vote whatever they want. I tell her I will be there, even if I have to down 3 energy drinks to stay awake. After she leaves, I sit down at my kitchen table and start digging. The violation notice has a case number on it, and something about that number feels familiar. I pull up my filing cabinet, the one where I keep all the HOA correspondence from the past 3 years, and I find an old letter from 18 months ago. A neighbor 2 streets over, a guy named Dan, had received a nearly identical violation for the same parking rule. He fought it, submitted photos and timestamps, and the board dismissed it without explanation. I remember hearing about it at the time because Dan was furious. He said the whole thing felt staged, like someone was testing how far they could push before anyone pushed back. He ended up moving out 6 months later. I text Dan even though we have not talked in over a year. I ask if he still has any of the paperwork from his case. He replies within 5 minutes. He says he kept everything and he is happy to send it over because he never got closure on what happened. He emails me a scan of his violation notice and I compare it to mine. The wording is identical, right down to the phrasing. Same case number format, same citation of the parking rule, same 72-hour deadline. The only difference is the date and my address instead of his. That is clue number 1. Someone is using a template, and they are reusing it without changing the details. I go back to the portal and submit my formal records request. I ask for the violation log, the board meeting minutes from the past 2 years, and any financial records related to towing fees and enforcement actions. The portal says my request has been received and will be processed within 10 business days. That puts me right up against the 72-hour tow deadline, which is no coincidence. I call the management company directly, bypassing the portal. The woman who answers sounds tired. I explain the situation, and she puts me on hold. When she comes back, she says Ruth Parker has flagged my account as non-compliant, and any records requests have to go through her first. I ask when that policy started, and the woman hesitates. She says it was added to the procedures about 6 months ago. I thank her and hang up, and I realize I just found clue number 2. Ruth has inserted herself as a gatekeeper, which means she can delay or block anything that might expose her. My parent asks me what is going on, and I give them the short version. They tell me to be careful, because people like Ruth do not back down easily. I promise I will handle it, but inside I am already planning my next move. I need more proof, and I need it before the hearing. I drive over to Dan's old house that evening, even though he does not live there anymore. The new owners are a young couple, and I introduce myself. I ask if they have had any issues with the HOA, and the husband laughs. He says they got a violation notice 2 weeks after moving in, claiming their mailbox was the wrong color. They repainted it, submitted photos, and then got another notice saying the paint brand was not on the approved list. They are still fighting it. I ask if I can see the notices, and he brings them out. Same template. Same case number format. Same 72-hour pressure tactic. That is clue number 3. This is not random. This is a pattern, and Ruth is at the center of it. I spend the next 2 days gathering everything I can. I pull my bank statements and match them against the gas station timestamps to prove I have been moving my truck regularly. I download every email I have ever received from the HOA and start building a timeline. I also reach out to a contractor I know who did some work in the neighborhood last year. His name is Mike, and he has photos and timestamps from the day Ruth interfered with his work. He was repairing a fence for another homeowner, and Ruth showed up with a clipboard, claiming he did not have the proper HOA approval. He had the approval form in his truck, signed and dated, but she insisted it was the wrong version. He ended up having to stop work for 3 days while the homeowner resubmitted the paperwork. Mike tells me he still has the original approval form, and it is identical to the one Ruth claimed was wrong. He agrees to testify if I need him. The 72-hour deadline is approaching, and I still have not heard back from the management company about my records request. I call again, and this time I get a different person. He tells me the request is still pending because Ruth has not signed off on it. I ask what happens if she never signs off, and he does not have an answer. I tell him I am filing a formal complaint with the board, and he says that is my right. He sounds like he has had this conversation before. On the morning of the third day, I wake up to find a tow truck idling at the curb in front of my house. The driver is standing next to my truck, looking at his phone. I throw on my clothes and run outside, still wearing my blue bucket hat and work gloves from the night shift. The driver looks up and says he has an order to tow this vehicle for an HOA violation. I ask to see the order, and he hands me a printed sheet. It has Ruth's signature at the bottom, and it is dated today, which means she signed it before the 72-hour deadline even expired. I tell the driver I am disputing the violation, and I show him my evidence. He shrugs and says he just does what the HOA tells him. He is impatient, and I can tell he wants to hook first and ask questions never, just like Ruth probably told him to. I pull out my phone and call the management company again, this time on speaker so the driver can hear. The woman who answers confirms that my records request is still pending, which means the violation has not been properly reviewed. The driver hears this and hesitates. He says he is not getting in the middle of an HOA dispute, and he gets back in his truck. He drives off without hooking my vehicle, and I feel a small victory. But I know this is not over. I get a text from Mike, the contractor. He says he just heard from another homeowner that Ruth showed up at their house yesterday with a surprise inspection stunt, walking around their property with a clipboard like it is a crime scene. She cited them for a bush that was 6 inches over the height limit, even though the same bush has been there for 5 years. Mike says the homeowner is furious and wants to join forces. I tell him I am already building a case, and any additional witnesses will help. The hearing is 2 days away, and I still do not have the records I requested. I decide to go to the management company office in person. It is a small office in a strip mall, and when I walk in, the receptionist recognizes me from my phone calls. She says Ruth called this morning and told them not to release any records to me without a board vote. I ask when the next board vote is scheduled, and she says it is the day after my hearing. I point out that this is circular logic, and she nods sympathetically. She tells me off the record that Ruth has done this before, and the management company is tired of dealing with her. I ask if there is anyone higher up I can talk to, and she gives me the name of the regional manager. I call him from the parking lot, and he agrees to meet with me later that afternoon. When I sit down with him, I lay out everything I have: the template violations, the timeline, the blocked records requests, the premature tow order. He listens, takes notes, and then tells me something I was not expecting. He says the management company has been trying to get Cedar Pointe Commons to switch to a new compliance process for over a year, but Ruth has been blocking it. She insists the current process works fine, and she has enough votes on the board to kill any changes. He also tells me that the HOA's insurance carrier has been asking questions. There have been multiple harassment complaints filed against the association in the past 18 months, and the carrier is concerned about liability. If the complaints keep stacking, the carrier is threatening cancellation. That is clue number 4, and it is a big one. Ruth is not just running a petty enforcement scheme, she is putting the entire association at risk. The regional manager agrees to attend the hearing as an observer, and he says he will bring the records I requested, board approval or not. He tells me to be ready, because Ruth is not going to take this quietly. If you are enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA drama. The night before the hearing, I get a call from a neighbor I barely know. Her name is Carol, and she lives 3 doors down. She says she heard about my situation and she wants to tell me something. 2 years ago, Carol received a violation notice for a fence that was supposedly built without HOA approval. She had the approval paperwork, but when she went to the hearing, Ruth claimed the approval had been rescinded. Carol asked to see the rescission notice, and Ruth said it was in the file, but she could not locate it at that moment. The board voted to fine Carol anyway, and she ended up paying $1,200 to avoid a lien. Carol never got closure, and she has been bitter about it ever since. She offers to testify, and I add her to my list. I spend the rest of the night preparing. I print out every document, every email, every photo. I organize them in a binder with tabs, and I practice my opening statement. My parent tells me I look like a lawyer, and I laugh, but I am nervous. I have never done anything like this before, and I do not know if I am ready. The hearing is scheduled for 10 in the morning at the community clubhouse. I arrive 15 minutes early, and the parking lot is already half full. I recognize a few faces from the neighborhood, including Mike and Carol. The regional manager is there too, standing near the entrance with a file box under his arm. Ruth is inside, setting up at the head table with her portable folder organizer in front of her. She is wearing the same red windbreaker and red sun hat, and she has her coffee tumbler on the table like she is settling in for a long day. The board president, a man named Gary, calls the meeting to order. There are 5 board members total, and Ruth is sitting to Gary's right. The rest of the board looks uncomfortable, like they would rather be anywhere else. Gary reads the agenda, and my case is listed first. He asks Ruth to present the violation, and she stands up. She gives a long speech about the importance of compliance and how the parking rule exists to maintain property values. She holds up the laminated policy sheet and reads from it, even though nobody asked her to. She says I have been non-compliant for weeks, and the association has no choice but to enforce the rule. When she finishes, Gary asks if I want to respond. I stand up and walk to the front. I open my binder and start with the doorbell camera footage. I show the timestamps, the gas receipts, and the photos of my truck in different locations over the past 2 weeks. I point out that the violation notice was dated the same day Ruth was caught on my doorbell camera walking past my porch, which means she filed the complaint herself. Ruth interrupts and says that is not relevant. Gary tells her to let me finish. I move on to the template violations. I show Dan's old notice, the new owner's mailbox notice, and Carol's fence notice. I point out that they all use the same wording, the same case number format, and the same 72-hour pressure tactic. I ask Ruth to explain why these notices are so similar, and she says it is just standard procedure. I ask her to show me the procedure manual, and she says it is not public record. The regional manager stands up and says he has a copy of the procedure manual, and there is no language in it that matches the template Ruth has been using. Ruth's face goes red. She says the regional manager does not have the authority to present documents without board approval. Gary cuts her off and says the regional manager is here as an observer, and he is allowed to provide relevant information. Ruth sits down hard, and I can see her gripping her coffee tumbler so tight her knuckles are white. I move on to the records request. I show the email trail, the blocked requests, and the timeline that proves Ruth has been acting as a gatekeeper. I point out that the management company confirmed this, and the regional manager nods. I also bring up the premature tow order, the one Ruth signed before the 72-hour deadline expired. I show the driver's statement, which he sent me in writing the day after the incident. Ruth stands up again and says the tow order was a mistake, that she signed the wrong form. I ask her to produce the correct form, and she says she does not have it with her. Carol raises her hand from the audience and asks if she can speak. Gary allows it, and Carol tells her story about the fence violation and the missing rescission notice. Mike stands up next and talks about the fence repair incident and the duplicate approval forms. Another neighbor I have never met stands up and says he received a violation notice last month for a mailbox flag that was supposedly the wrong color, even though it is the same flag that has been there for 10 years. The room is starting to turn, and I can see the board members shifting in their seats. Gary asks Ruth if she has anything to add. She stands up and says this is all just coincidence, that enforcement is subjective, and the board has to trust her judgment. I decide what counts as compliant, not you, she says, and I see Mike roll his eyes. Gary asks her to sit down, and he confers with the other board members in whispers. But I am not done. I let her call my bluff, because she did not realize I was not bluffing. I reach into my bag and pull out a second binder, the one I have been holding back. Inside are HOA financial records that show a pattern of selective enforcement tied to missing funds. I got these records from a public filing request through the city, not the HOA, which means Ruth could not block it. The records show that over the past 2 years, the HOA has collected over $30,000 in towing fees and compliance fines, but only $18,000 of that was deposited into the association's bank account. The rest is unaccounted for. I also have the ledger printouts, the ones that show Ruth's favorite fee listed over and over, a $200 enforcement processing fee that appears on nearly every violation but is not mentioned anywhere in the governing documents. I point out that this fee does not exist in the official rules, which means it is imaginary. Ruth created it, added it to the notices, and collected it without board approval. The room goes silent. Ruth is standing now, her face pale. She says the processing fee is a standard charge, that it has always been there. I ask her to show me where it appears in the governing documents, and she cannot. Gary asks the regional manager if he has ever seen this fee before, and the regional manager says no, and furthermore, any fee like that would require a board vote and an amendment to the rules. Ruth says she does not have to explain herself to me, and she starts packing up her folder organizer. Gary tells her to sit down, and his voice is sharp now. I hand the financial records to Gary and I tell him I am sending copies to every homeowner in the association tonight, along with a formal demand letter with attachments that forces a written response within days. Ruth's head snaps up, and she says I do not have the authority to do that. I tell her I am a homeowner, and I have every right to share public records with my neighbors. The board members are passing the binder around now, and I can see their faces changing as they read. Gary calls for a recess. The board members leave the room, and the audience starts buzzing. Ruth tries to leave, but Carol blocks the door and tells her she owes everyone an explanation. Ruth pushes past her, and I hear her car start outside a minute later. Mike comes over and claps me on the shoulder. He says I just did what half the neighborhood has wanted to do for years. The board comes back 20 minutes later, and Gary looks exhausted. He says the board is voting to dismiss my violation immediately, and they are opening an internal audit of all enforcement actions from the past 3 years. He also says Ruth Parker is being removed as meeting chair and will no longer have access to the microphone or the enforcement process. The compliance process will be audited and cleaned up, and any homeowner who was charged the imaginary processing fee will receive a refund. The vote is unanimous. Gary also says the board is filing a formal complaint with the management company and the HOA's attorney to investigate the missing funds. If the investigation finds evidence of misappropriation, the board will involve law enforcement. Ruth is not here to respond, but I do not think she would have anything to say that would help her. The hearing ends, and I walk out into the parking lot with my binder under my arm. My parent is waiting in the car, and they ask how it went. I tell them we won, and they smile. But I know this is not over yet. Ruth is going to fight back, and I need to be ready. 2 days later, I get a certified letter in the mail. It is from Ruth's attorney, and it is a frivolous small claims filing meant to force me into court and waste time. She is suing me for defamation, claiming I made false statements about her during the hearing. The filing asks for $5,000 in damages. I read it twice, and then I call the attorney who helped me with the public records request. He tells me the case is garbage, that everything I said at the hearing was either factual or protected opinion. He also says Ruth is probably trying to intimidate me into dropping the issue. He offers to represent me pro bono, and I accept. I also get a message from the regional manager. He says the management company is formally recommending that Cedar Pointe Commons terminate Ruth's position on the finance committee. The board is scheduled to vote on it next week, and the regional manager expects it to pass. He also tells me that 2 other homeowners have come forward with complaints about Ruth, and the insurance carrier is now actively investigating the harassment claims. If the carrier finds a pattern, they will drop the association unless Ruth is removed. The next few days are tense. I go to work, I come home, I take care of my parent, and I keep checking my phone for updates. Mike texts me to say he has been contacted by the HOA attorney for a witness statement, and he is happy to provide one. Carol sends me a message saying she has been talking to other neighbors, and at least a dozen people are planning to attend the next board meeting to demand Ruth's removal. The small claims court date is set for 3 weeks out, but my attorney files a motion to dismiss based on the hearing transcript and the financial records. He says we should have a ruling within a week. In the meantime, I focus on compiling the final version of the evidence package. I include everything: the doorbell camera footage, the template violations, the financial ledger, the witness statements, and the timeline. I also include a summary of the cold case I reopened, showing how the same pattern of selective enforcement has been happening for years. I email the package to every homeowner in Cedar Pointe Commons, just like I promised. The response is immediate. My inbox floods with replies. Some people thank me. Some people share their own stories of being targeted by Ruth. One couple says they were fined $1,500 for a shed that was supposedly too close to the property line, even though they had a survey showing it was compliant. Another homeowner says Ruth tried to force them to remove a tree that was blocking her view, even though the tree was on their property and not in violation of any rule. The stories keep coming, and I realize Ruth has been doing this for a long time. The board meeting happens on a Tuesday night, and the clubhouse is packed. I count at least 40 people in the room, which is more than I have ever seen at an HOA meeting. Ruth is sitting in the back row, and she is not wearing her red sun hat this time. She looks smaller somehow, like she knows what is coming. Gary calls the meeting to order, and the first item on the agenda is the vote to remove Ruth from the finance committee. Gary reads the formal recommendation from the management company, which cites the missing funds, the unauthorized fees, and the pattern of selective enforcement. He asks if anyone wants to speak in favor of keeping Ruth on the committee. Nobody raises their hand. Gary asks if anyone wants to speak in favor of removing her. Carol stands up and gives a short speech about accountability. Mike talks about the interference with his work and the duplicate approval forms. The couple with the shed shares their story. By the time the public comment period ends, 15 people have spoken, and not one of them has defended Ruth. Gary calls for the vote, and it passes 5-0. Ruth is officially removed from the finance committee, effective immediately. But the board is not done. Gary announces that the internal audit has been completed, and the findings are troubling. The auditor found evidence that Ruth created the $200 processing fee without authorization and collected it on over 60 violations. The total amount collected from this imaginary fee is $12,000, and none of it was deposited into the association's account. The auditor also found discrepancies in the towing fee records, with several tows being charged to homeowners even though the towing company never invoiced the HOA for those jobs. The implication is clear. Ruth was pocketing the money. Gary says the board is referring the matter to the local police for investigation, and the HOA's attorney is preparing a civil complaint to recover the missing funds. Ruth stands up and starts to speak, but Gary cuts her off. He says she is no longer a committee member, and she does not have speaking privileges at this meeting. She grabs her portable folder organizer and walks out, slamming the door behind her. The room erupts in applause. The meeting continues, and the board votes to adopt a new compliance process that requires all violations to be reviewed by the management company before any enforcement action is taken. The process includes an evidence-first rule, which means no fines or tows can be issued without documented proof of the violation. The board also votes to refund every homeowner who was charged the imaginary processing fee, and they authorize the management company to contact everyone who was affected. Gary thanks me publicly for bringing the issue to light, and he apologizes on behalf of the board for letting it go on as long as it did. I nod, but I do not feel like celebrating yet. I know Ruth is going to keep fighting, and I need to stay on guard. The small claims motion to dismiss is granted a week later. The judge rules that my statements at the hearing were protected speech, and Ruth's defamation claim has no merit. My attorney sends me a copy of the ruling, and I feel a weight lift off my shoulders. Ruth's attorney does not appeal, which tells me they know the case was weak from the start. A neighbor named Tom reaches out to me. He says he has been following the story, and he has something I might want to see. He was part of the HOA board 3 years ago, back when Ruth first joined the finance committee. Tom says there was a dispute over the budget at the time, and Ruth pushed hard to create a new line item for enforcement processing. The board voted it down, but Ruth added it to the invoices anyway. Tom resigned from the board shortly after, frustrated that nobody was willing to confront her. He still has the email chain from that dispute, and he forwards it to me. It is proof that Ruth knew the fee was not authorized, and she collected it anyway. I add Tom's email chain to the evidence package and send an updated version to the board and the police detective who is handling the investigation. Tom also offers to testify if needed, and I add him to the list. The case is building, and I feel like I am finally seeing the full picture. But Ruth is not done. She tries one more stunt, and it is a big one. She schedules a surprise inspection of my property, claiming she is still authorized to conduct inspections as a homeowner. She shows up one afternoon with a clipboard and a handheld radio, walking around my driveway and taking photos. I step outside and ask her what she is doing, and she says she is documenting additional violations. I tell her she has no authority to inspect my property, and she says any homeowner can inspect common areas. I point out that my driveway is not a common area, and she ignores me. I call the police non-emergency line and explain the situation. A deputy arrives about 15 minutes later, and he asks Ruth to explain what she is doing. She says she is conducting an HOA inspection, and the deputy asks to see her credentials. She does not have any. The deputy tells her she is trespassing, and she needs to leave immediately. She argues with him, saying the HOA rules give her the right to inspect properties. The deputy says the HOA rules do not override property law, and if she does not leave, he will cite her. She finally leaves, but not before taking one last photo of my truck. The deputy gives me a case number and tells me to file a restraining order if she comes back. That incident becomes the final straw for several board members. Gary calls me the next day and says the board is voting to ban Ruth from all HOA properties and meetings until the investigation is complete. He also says the insurance carrier has issued an ultimatum. Either the association removes Ruth from all positions and implements the new compliance process, or the carrier will drop the policy. The board votes unanimously to comply with the carrier's demands, and Ruth is officially banned from HOA activities. The police investigation moves forward, and I get periodic updates from the detective. He tells me they have identified at least 15 homeowners who paid the imaginary processing fee, and they are working to confirm how much money Ruth collected. The detective also says they are looking into the towing fee discrepancies, and they are interviewing the towing company owner to see if he has any records of payments that do not match the invoices. The detective is optimistic that they will have enough evidence to file charges within a month. I also get a surprise visit from a neighbor named Angela. She lives on the other side of the development, and I have never spoken to her before. She says she heard about the case and she has a story that might help. 3 years ago, Angela filed a complaint against Ruth for harassment after Ruth tried to force her to remove a political sign from her yard. Angela went through the HOA dispute process, and the board sided with her. But Ruth retaliated by filing a violation notice against Angela for a non-existent landscaping issue. Angela fought it and won. But the process was exhausting and expensive. Angela says she has all the paperwork from that case and she is willing to share it. She also says Ruth told her at the time, "We can tow first and explain later." That is how enforcement works. The exact same line she used on me. I add Angela's story to the evidence package and I send it to the detective. The line about towing first is becoming a pattern, and it shows that Ruth has been using intimidation tactics for years. Angela also tells me that after her case was resolved, several other homeowners quietly told her they had similar experiences with Ruth, but were too afraid to come forward. Angela says she is organizing a group of these homeowners, and they are planning to submit a joint complaint to the board. I tell her I will support them however I can. A neighbor who works in accounting offers to review the HOA financial records for free. His name is Brian, and he has experience auditing nonprofits. He spends a weekend going through the ledgers I provided, and he finds even more irregularities. He discovers that Ruth approved several vendor payments without board authorization, including a payment to a towing company that does not appear on the HOA's approved vendor list. Brian also finds evidence that Ruth created fake invoice records to justify some of the enforcement fees. He writes up a summary of his findings and sends it to the board and the detective. His analysis is clear and damning, and it becomes a key piece of the evidence package. The next board meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks later, and the agenda includes a vote on the final compliance process reforms. I plan to attend, but I also know Ruth might try something. A few days before the meeting, I get a strange message on the HOA portal. It is a notification that my account has been flagged for non-payment of dues, even though I paid my quarterly dues 3 weeks ago and have the receipt. I call the management company, and they say the payment is showing as rejected in the system. I send them a copy of my bank statement showing the payment cleared, and they say it will take a few days to investigate. I suspect Ruth is behind this, and I decide to test my theory. I check the portal audit log, which is a feature I did not know existed until Brian showed me how to access it. The log shows that my account was manually flagged for non-payment by a user with Ruth's login credentials. And the timestamp is from yesterday. I screenshot the log and send it to the regional manager, along with proof that my payment cleared. The regional manager calls me within an hour and says he is escalating this to the corporate office. He also says Ruth's portal access is being revoked immediately, and the management company is launching an internal investigation into how she retained access after being removed from the committee. That portal incident becomes another key piece of evidence, because it shows Ruth is actively trying to sabotage me even after being removed from her position. The detective is very interested in this, and he says it could support additional charges related to computer fraud or harassment. The day before the board meeting, I get a call from a number I do not recognize. It is a woman who says she used to work for the management company, and she has information about Ruth. She says her name is Linda, and she was the account manager for Cedar Pointe Commons until about a year ago. Linda says she left the job because she could not deal with Ruth anymore. Linda tells me that Ruth frequently called her demanding changes to homeowner accounts, asking for violations to be added or removed without documentation. Linda refused most of the requests, and Ruth complained to Linda's supervisor. Eventually, Linda was reassigned to a different account, and she quit shortly after. Linda says she reported Ruth's behavior to the regional manager at the time, but nothing was done. She offers to provide a written statement, and I accept. Linda's statement adds another layer to the case, showing that Ruth's misconduct goes back years, and was known to the management company. The night before the board meeting, I receive an email from the detective. He says they have completed the initial investigation, and they are forwarding the case to the district attorney's office for review. The detective says the evidence is strong, and he expects charges to be filed within the next few weeks. He thanks me for my cooperation and tells me I will be contacted if they need any additional information. I feel relieved, but also exhausted. This process has taken over my life for the past month, and I am ready for it to be over. The board meeting happens on a Wednesday night, and the clubhouse is packed again. Ruth is not there, which does not surprise me. Gary calls the meeting to order and announces that the compliance process reforms have been finalized. The new process includes the evidence first rule, mandatory review by the management company, and a homeowner appeals process that allows anyone to challenge a violation before enforcement action is taken. The board votes to adopt the reforms unanimously, and the room applauds. Gary also announces that the HOA attorney has filed a civil lawsuit against Ruth Parker to recover the missing funds. The lawsuit seeks reimbursement of the $12,000 in unauthorized processing fees, plus damages for the cost of the audit and the increased insurance premiums caused by the harassment complaints. Gary says the board is committed to holding Ruth accountable, and they will not settle for anything less than full restitution. The meeting ends, and I walk out into the parking lot feeling lighter than I have in weeks. My parent is waiting in the car, and they ask if it is finally over. I tell them it is getting there, but we are not quite done yet. There is still one more thing I need to do. A few days later, I get a notification that a hearing has been scheduled at the city municipal court. It is not related to Ruth directly, but it is related to the towing company she used. The city received multiple complaints about the company conducting unauthorized tows, and the city attorney is holding a hearing to determine if the company's business license should be revoked. I am listed as a witness, along with several other homeowners from Cedar Pointe Commons. The hearing is scheduled for next month, and I plan to attend. In the meantime, I focus on getting back to normal. I go to work, I take care of my parent, and I try to decompress. But the story is not over yet. One afternoon, I run into Ruth at a coffee shop parking lot near the development. She is getting out of her car, and she sees me at the same time I see her. For a moment, we just stare at each other, and then she starts walking toward me. I brace myself for another confrontation, but this time, I am ready. She stops a few feet away and says we need to talk. I tell her I have nothing to say to her, and I am not interested in any deals. She says she is not here to make a deal. She says she wants to explain. I tell her the time for explanations was at the hearing, and she chose not to show up. She says the board railroaded her, that I manipulated everyone with my so-called evidence. I pull out my phone and start recording. She notices and steps closer, her voice rising. "You think you are so smart," she says, waving her coffee tumbler like a weapon. "I decide what counts as compliant, not you." I let her keep talking, because every word she says is more evidence. A few people in the parking lot stop and watch. One of them is the gate technician from the first day, and he recognizes both of us. He pulls out his phone and starts recording too. Ruth realizes she is being recorded from multiple angles, and her face goes pale. She tries to grab my phone, and I step back. The gate technician steps between us and tells her to back off. She yells at him, saying he does not know what he is talking about. He tells her he has seen her harass people before, and he is tired of it. She storms off to her car, and I hear her tires screech as she drives away. I send the video to the detective and the HOA attorney. The attorney replies within an hour, saying the video will be included in the civil lawsuit as evidence of ongoing harassment. The detective says it could support additional criminal charges related to intimidation or stalking. The gate technician also sends me his video, and he says he is willing to testify if needed. I thank him, and I add his contact information to the list of witnesses. A week later, the district attorney's office files formal charges against Ruth Parker. The charges include theft, fraud, and abuse of office. The theft charge is related to the $12,000 in unauthorized processing fees. The fraud charge is related to the fake invoice records and the towing fee discrepancies. The abuse of office charge is related to her use of her HOA position to intimidate and harass homeowners. The DA's office schedules an arraignment for the following month, and Ruth is required to appear in person. The HOA board also moves forward with the civil lawsuit. The attorney files a motion for summary judgment, arguing that the evidence is overwhelming and there is no genuine dispute of material fact. The motion includes the financial ledger, the audit report, the witness statements, and the videos from the coffee shop parking lot. Ruth's attorney files a response, but it is weak. He argues that Ruth believed she had the authority to create the processing fee and that any mistakes were unintentional. The judge denies the response and grants the motion for summary judgment. The HOA is awarded full restitution, plus legal fees and damages. The total judgment is over $20,000. Ruth does not pay. The HOA attorney files a motion to garnish her wages, and the court grants it. Ruth's bank account is frozen, and a portion of her paycheck is redirected to the HOA every month until the judgment is paid in full. The board also places a lien on Ruth's property, which means she cannot sell her house without paying off the debt first. The criminal case moves forward, and Ruth pleads not guilty at the arraignment. Her attorney tries to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA's office refuses. They say the evidence is too strong, and they want to take it to trial. The trial is scheduled for 6 months out, and I am listed as a key witness. I tell the DA I am ready to testify, and I provide them with copies of all the evidence I have collected. In the meantime, the towing company loses its business license. The city hearing finds that the company conducted multiple unauthorized tows on behalf of Ruth, and they failed to follow proper notification procedures. The company owner tries to argue that he was just following Ruth's instructions, but the city attorney says that does not absolve him of responsibility. The license is revoked, and the company is ordered to refund all the homeowners who were improperly towed. That list includes me, and I receive a check for $350 a few weeks later. The board also completes the refund process for the imaginary processing fee. Every homeowner who paid it receives a check, and the total refunds exceed $12,000. The board sends a letter to all homeowners explaining what happened and apologizing for the oversight. The letter also announces the new compliance process and invites anyone with concerns to attend the next board meeting. The response is overwhelmingly positive, and several homeowners thank the board for taking action. Gary steps down as board president a few months later, citing personal reasons. He is replaced by Carol, the neighbor who testified at the original hearing. Carol's first act as president is to create a homeowner oversight committee to review all HOA enforcement actions and ensure the new compliance process is being followed. The committee includes Mike, Brian, and Angela, and they meet monthly to review cases and make recommendations to the board. The new system works well, and the number of violations drops significantly. Most importantly, the violations that are issued are legitimate and well documented. Ruth's criminal trial finally happens, and it lasts 3 days. I testify on the second day, and I walk the jury through the entire timeline. I show them the doorbell camera footage, the template violations, the financial ledger, and the portal audit log. I explain how Ruth used her position to intimidate homeowners and collect unauthorized fees. The prosecutor also calls Mike, Carol, Angela, Linda, Tom, and the gate technician as witnesses. Each of them tells their story, and the pattern becomes undeniable. Ruth's attorney tries to argue that she made mistakes but did not intend to commit fraud. He says she believed she had the authority to create the processing fee, and she did not realize it was wrong. But the prosecutor brings up the email chain from Tom, the one that shows Ruth knew the fee was not authorized. He also brings up the video from the coffee shop parking lot, where Ruth says, "I decide what counts as compliant, not you." The jury deliberates for less than 2 hours and returns a guilty verdict on all charges. The judge sentences Ruth to 18 months in prison with credit for time served. She is also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and to all the homeowners she defrauded. The judge says her actions were a betrayal of trust and a clear abuse of power. Ruth does not say anything at the sentencing, and she is led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. The Cedar Pointe Commons Association moves on. The new compliance process is working, and the harassment complaints stop. The insurance carrier agrees to renew the policy, and the premiums go down. The board holds regular meetings, and homeowners actually attend them. The culture shifts from fear and suspicion to cooperation and transparency. People start talking to each other again, and the neighborhood feels like a community instead of a battleground. I get my life back. My parent finishes recovering and moves back to their own place. I go back to working nights and sleeping during the day without worrying about surprise inspections or frivolous violations. I even start attending the monthly board meetings, not because I have to, but because I want to stay informed. Carol thanks me every time she sees me, and she says the association would not have changed without me pushing back. One afternoon, I am walking to my mailbox when I see a for sale sign in Ruth's yard. She is moving out, probably to escape the judgment and the lien. I do not feel sorry for her. She had every opportunity to do the right thing, and she chose not to. Her favorite fee got proven imaginary in the ledger, and the HOA compliance process was audited and cleaned up. Karen was removed as meeting chair and lost the microphone control. I sent a formal demand letter with attachments that forced a written response within days, and it all came crashing down on her. The neighborhood is better without her, and I am proud of the role I played in making that happen. I learned that you cannot back down from people like Ruth. You have to stand your ground, gather your evidence, and make sure the truth comes out. It is not easy, and it is not fun, but it is necessary. And when it is all over, you can finally breathe again. The cold case I reopened turned out to be bigger than I ever imagined. It was not just about one violation or one fee. It was about a pattern of abuse that went on for years, unchecked and unchallenged. I am glad I did not let it go. I am glad I kept digging, kept asking questions, and kept demanding answers. Because in the end, justice was not just about winning my case. It was about making sure Ruth could not do this to anyone else ever again. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next HOA story.